I didn't think anything of it the first time he knocked. It was a Tuesday evening, early fall, one of those in-between days where the air still held on to summer, but the light outside turned soft way too early. I was sitting at my kitchen counter with my laptop open, half working, half scrolling, nursing a glass of red wine I probably didn't need, but poured anyway. My husband, Eric, was on another business trip. Chicago this time, or maybe Denver. I'd stopped keeping track because it all blurred together after a while. The knock came again, a little louder this time. Not aggressive, just persistent. I remember feeling slightly annoyed, like, who even shows up unannounced anymore? When I opened the door, I saw him standing there. Liam, my neighbor's son. He looked smaller than I remembered, even though I'd seen him grow up over the past few years. He was probably 14 now, maybe 15, lanky and awkward in that way teenage boys are, like his limbs didn't quite belong to him yet. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder and this hesitant look on his face, like he was already apologizing before saying anything. "Hey, Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice cracking just slightly. Sorry to bother you. My mom said you're good at, writing stuff?" I blinked, caught off guard. "Writing stuff?" "Yeah, like essays. I have this assignment and I don't really get it. And she said you might help?" His mom, Jenna, and I weren't exactly friends, but we were neighbor-friendly. Wave across the driveway, small talk at the mailbox, occasional chats when the trash bins were out. She'd mentioned before that I worked in marketing, that I wrote content for brands. I guess to her that translated into can help with homework. I hesitated for maybe half a second before stepping aside. "Yeah, sure, come in." That was it. That's how it started. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious, just a kid needing help with homework. He sat at my kitchen counter while I leaned against it, reading over his assignment. It was a personal essay, something about describing a moment that changed how you see the world. Pretty standard, the kind of thing I could knock out in my sleep. "So what's confusing you?" I asked. He shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "I don't know what to write about." I smiled a little. "That's kind of the whole point." "Yeah, but I haven't had, a moment like that." I studied him for a second. He seemed sincere, not lazy, not trying to get out of it, just stuck. "Everyone's had something," I said. "It doesn't have to be dramatic, just something that made you think differently, even a little." He nodded, but I could tell he still wasn't getting it. So I started asking questions about school, his friends, his family, just trying to spark something. At first, his answers were short, one-word responses, shrugs, the usual teenage wall. But after a few minutes, something shifted. He started opening up, just a little, talking about how his parents fought a lot, how his dad moved out last year, how things felt weird now, like nothing really fit anymore. I didn't expect that. I thought I'd be helping with sentence structure, not this. "That sounds like something," I said gently. "That kind of change, it affects how you see things." He looked down at his hands. "Yeah, I guess." We ended up spending about an hour working on it. I helped him outline his thoughts, showed him how to turn feelings into sentences that actually made sense. He wrote slowly, carefully, like each word mattered more than it should. When he finally packed up his stuff, he looked lighter somehow. "Thanks," he said, standing by the door. "I didn't think I'd actually finish it." "You did the work," I told him. "I just helped a little." He gave me this small, almost shy smile, then left. I didn't think about it much after that. But then he came back. 2 days later. Same hesitant knock, same awkward stance on my doorstep. "Hey," he said, I got another assignment. It's not writing, but I still don't get it." I should have said no, or at least maybe another time. But I didn't. "Come in," I said again. That became a pattern. At first, it was once a week, then twice. Sometimes he actually needed help. Math, reading, whatever. Other times it felt like he just didn't want to go home right away. And I didn't question it. If anything, I started to look forward to it. That sounds worse than it was. At least, it wasn't what you're probably thinking. It wasn't inappropriate. Not then. It was easy, comfortable, a distraction. My house had been quiet for a long time. Too quiet. Eric and I didn't fight. That would have almost been better. Fighting at least meant something was still alive. We just coexisted. He traveled constantly, and when he was home, he was either on his phone or exhausted. Conversations felt like obligations. We hadn't really connected in months. So having someone sit across from me, asking questions, listening, even if it was just about homework, it filled a space I hadn't realized was so empty. Liam started talking more too, not just about school, but about everything. His friends, the kids he didn't like, the teachers who annoyed him.
Sometimes about his mom, though he was careful with that. I could tell there were things he wasn't saying. You don't have to tell me anything you're not comfortable with, I told him once. He nodded, but then he said, it's just, she's different now. Different how? He shrugged. I don't know. She's always tired, or mad, or both. That hit a little too close to home, and I didn't like it. So I kept things light after that, focused on homework, on safe topics. But the line had already shifted, just slightly. One evening, he stayed later than usual. It was already dark outside, and I glanced at the clock, realizing it was past 8. Does your mom know you're here? I asked. Yeah, he said quickly. I told her. Something in his tone made me pause, but I let it go. You should probably head back, I said. It's getting late. He didn't move right away, just sat there fidgeting with the strap of his backpack. Can I ask you something? He said. Sure. He hesitated like he was debating whether to say it. Do you ever feel like people just pretend everything's fine when it's not? I let out a small breath. Yeah, all the time. He looked at me then, really looked at me, like he was trying to read something beneath the surface. My mom does that, he said quietly. Like, she acts like we're okay, but we're not. I didn't know what to say to that. There are moments where anything you say feels like the wrong thing, so I just nodded. That's hard. He nodded back, but his expression didn't change. If anything, it got more serious. And you, he added. My stomach tightened slightly. What about me? He held my gaze for a second too long. You do that too. I let out a small, nervous laugh. What are you talking about? You act like everything's fine, he said, his voice steady now. But it's not. I can tell. I felt something shift in the room. Subtle, but unmistakable. Like the air had changed. That's not really something you need to worry about, I said, trying to keep my tone light, dismissive. I'm not worried, he said. I just noticed things. It was such a strange thing to hear from someone his age. Too perceptive. Too direct. I crossed my arms, more out of instinct than anything. Okay, detective.
What exactly do you think you've noticed? He didn't smile. I think you're lonely, he said. The words landed harder than I expected, not because they were cruel, but because they were accurate. I opened my mouth to brush it off, to turn it into a joke, but nothing came out. He looked down again, like maybe he'd realized he'd crossed a line. Sorry, he muttered. I didn't mean to. It's fine, I cut in quickly, too quickly. The room felt too small all of a sudden. Seriously, I added, forcing a smile. You should go. Your mom's probably wondering where you are. This time, he stood up right away. Yeah, okay. He walked to the door, then paused, his hand on the handle. I didn't mean it in a bad way, he said without turning around. Just, you seem like someone who shouldn't be. And then he left. I stood there for a while after the door closed, staring at nothing, replaying his words in my head. You seem like someone who shouldn't be. It was such a simple sentence, but it stuck. And that was the moment, whether I wanted to admit it or not, that something changed. Not in a dramatic, obvious way. There was no line crossed, no big event. Just a quiet shift. A crack in something that had been sealed shut for a long time. And I didn't realize then how much that one conversation would unravel everything. The next time he came over, I almost didn't answer the door. I saw him through the front window, standing there like always, backpack hanging off one shoulder, shifting his weight from one foot to the other like he wasn't sure if he should stay or leave. For a second, I just stood in the hallway watching him, remembering what he'd said a few nights before. I think you're lonely. It shouldn't have mattered. He was a kid. What did he know? And yet, it sat under my skin in a way I couldn't shake. Not because it hurt, but because it felt like being seen when I hadn't realized how invisible I'd become. He knocked again, softer this time. I opened the door. Hey, I said, trying to sound normal. Hey, he replied, glancing up at me quickly before looking back down. Is this a bad time? I could have said yes. I probably should have. But instead, I stepped aside like I always did. No, it's fine. Come in. He walked in a little more cautiously than usual, like he wasn't sure if something had changed. And honestly, something had. I just didn't know how to define it yet. We didn't jump straight into homework this time. He set his bag down but didn't take anything out. You okay? I asked. Yeah, he said quickly. Why? You just seem quieter. He shrugged. Just tired, I guess. I nodded, though I didn't quite believe him. But I didn't push, not yet. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, watching him out of the corner of my eye. Normally, he'd already be asking questions or complaining about an assignment. Today, he just stood there, like he was waiting for something, or maybe building up to something. Do you actually need help with anything? I asked after a moment. He hesitated, then shook his head. Not really. That should have been my cue to end it right there. No homework, no reason to stay. Then why'd you come over? I asked, softer this time. He looked at me, and there was something different in his expression, less awkward, more intentional. I don't know, he admitted. I just didn't want to go home yet. There it was again, that subtle shift, the line blurring just a little more. You can't just hang out here whenever you don't feel like going home, I said, trying to keep it light, but there was an edge to it. I know, he said. I'm not trying to be weird or anything. I didn't say you were. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. It's just easier here, okay? That word, easier, hit me in a way I didn't expect, because I understood exactly what he meant. My house was quiet, predictable. No tension, no slammed doors, no raised voices. Just space. And apparently that space had become something he wanted to step into. That doesn't mean it's a good idea, I said, even though my voice had softened. He nodded, like he already knew that. Yeah, I get it. There was a pause, heavy and awkward. You can stay for a little while, I heard myself say, but not too late. I don't know why I said that. Actually, that's not true. I do know. I just didn't want to admit it. He smiled, just a small one, but real. Okay, thanks. We ended up sitting in the living room instead of the kitchen. No books, no assignments spread out between us. Just the TV on in the background, neither of us really watching it. At some point, I asked him about school again, and the conversation slowly started to flow like it used to. But it felt different now. Less like a teacher helping a student, more like two people just talking. And that should have made me uncomfortable, but it didn't. That was the problem. Do you ever regret it? He asked suddenly. I turned my head toward him. Regret what? Getting married. The question caught me completely off guard. That's a pretty big question. Yeah, he said, like that didn't bother him at all. But do you? I let out a quiet breath, staring at the TV for a second before answering. It's not that simple. That's not really an answer. I glanced at him. You don't even like it when your teachers say that, do you? He smirked a little. No. I hesitated, then said, I don't regret getting married. I regret how things turned out. He didn't respond right away, but I could feel him watching me. Like what? He asked. Like how people changed, I said. Or maybe they don't change, and you just start seeing them differently. He nodded slowly, like he was processing that. My dad changed, he said. Or at least I think he did. How so? He used to be around all the time, actually there. And then it was like he just checked out before he even left. That sounded familiar in a way I didn't like. And your mom? I asked carefully. She tries, he said. But it's like she's always somewhere else in her head. I looked down at my hands, resting in my lap. Yeah, I said quietly. That happens. There was a long pause after that. Not uncomfortable, exactly. Just heavy. You and Eric don't talk much, do you? He said. My head snapped up. Why would you say that? He shrugged, but there was that same steady look in his eyes. I don't know. I just never see him. And when I do, it's like you guys aren't really together. That shouldn't have made me defensive, but it did. You don't know anything about my marriage, I said, sharper than I intended. I didn't say I did. Then don't make assumptions. He held his hands up slightly, like he was backing off. Okay, sorry. The room went quiet again, but this time it felt different. Tense. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. I'm sorry, I said after a moment. That came out harsher than I meant it. It's fine, he said, but his tone had cooled. No, it's not. You caught me off guard. He nodded, but didn't say anything else. For a second, I thought that might be it, that he'd grab his bag and leave, and maybe that would be for the best. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned back slightly, looking at the ceiling. I think people can tell more than adults think they can, he said quietly. I swallowed. That doesn't mean they're right. Sometimes they are. I didn't argue with that.
Because the truth was, part of me knew he wasn't wrong, and that's what made it uncomfortable. We sat there a little longer, the conversation drifting to safer topics after that. Movies, school stuff, random things that didn't carry any weight. Eventually, I glanced at the clock. You should head back, I said. It's getting late again. Yeah, he said, sitting up. Okay. He grabbed his backpack, slinging it over his shoulder like always. When he reached the door, he paused. Hey, he said. Yeah? He turned to look at me, and for a second, he looked younger again, just a kid. Thanks for letting me hang out. I gave him a small smile. You're welcome. He hesitated, like he wanted to say something else. Then he shook his head slightly. Good night, Mrs. Carter. Good night, Liam. I watched him walk back across the yard to his house, the porch light flicking on as he got closer. For a second, I saw his mom's silhouette in the window, pacing, and then he was inside. I closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. This wasn't a big deal. That's what I told myself. He was just a kid going through a rough time. I was just being a good neighbor, a responsible adult. But something about it didn't feel that simple anymore. It was in the way he looked at me sometimes. Not inappropriate, not crossing any obvious line, but aware, observant in a way that made me feel exposed. And it was in the way I responded to it, the way I let him stay longer than I should have, the way I answered questions I probably should have deflected, the way I didn't shut it down when it started feeling less like helping and more like something else I couldn't quite name. I pushed away from the door and walked back into the living room, the silence settling in again. It didn't feel as peaceful as it used to. It felt noticeable, like something was missing, or maybe like something had started that I didn't fully understand yet. Either way, I had this quiet, persistent feeling in the back of my mind that things were shifting in a direction I wasn't prepared for, and I didn't stop it. That was the part I couldn't ignore. I didn't stop it. Things didn't spiral all at once. That's the part people never really understand unless they've lived it. There wasn't some dramatic moment where everything crossed a line in a single night. It was slower than that, quieter, built out of small decisions I kept convincing myself didn't matter. After that night, Liam started coming over more regularly, but it stopped being about homework almost entirely. Sometimes he'd bring a notebook or a textbook just to make it look like there was a reason, but we both knew that wasn't why he was there. And the worst part is, I let that become normal. It got to the point where I could tell when he'd had a bad day just by the way he knocked. Short, quick taps meant he was in a hurry, probably needed actual help. Slower, uneven knocks meant something was off. Those were the nights he stayed longer. One evening, maybe a week or two after that last conversation, he showed up without even pretending. No backpack, no books, just him. I opened the door and immediately noticed. "No homework today?" I asked, half joking, but there was a question underneath it. He shook his head. No. I should have said it right there. Then why are you here? But I didn't. Instead, I stepped aside again. "Okay," I said. "Come in." He walked in like he belonged there now, not hesitating, not hovering awkwardly near the door. That shift alone should have been enough to make me pause. But instead, I went into the kitchen and asked, "You want something to drink?" "Sure," he said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I handed him a soda and we ended up in the living room again. Same spot as before. Same quiet TV in the background. But the energy was different. More familiar. Too familiar. "What happened?" I asked after a few minutes. He glanced at me. "What do you mean?" "You didn't just show up for no reason." He hesitated, then leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "My mom had some guy over." That hit fast. "Oh. Yeah," he said, letting out a dry laugh. "First time I've actually seen one in the house." I didn't know what to say at first. There isn't really a script for that kind of thing. "How'd that go?" I asked carefully. He shrugged, but it was tight, controlled. "Exactly how you think it went." I studied him for a second. His jaw was clenched, eyes fixed on the floor. "Did you talk to her about it?" He shook his head immediately. "No, I'm not doing that." "Why not?" "Because she'll just turn it into something else, like I'm the problem for not being okay with it." I sighed softly. "That's tough." "She didn't even tell me," he added, his voice sharper now. "Just suddenly there's some guy sitting on our couch like he belongs there." I could feel the anger under his words. Not explosive, but simmering. "That can feel invasive," I said. "Yeah, exactly." He looked at me then. "Like everything's changing and no one even asks you if you're okay with it." I nodded slowly. "I get that." He held my gaze a second longer than usual, like he was searching for something in my reaction. "You really do," he said. It wasn't a question. And again, I didn't correct him. We sat there in that shared understanding, and something about it felt too close, too aligned. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked suddenly. My stomach tightened. "Leaving what?" "Your husband." I let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "That's not something you just casually ask someone." "You didn't answer." I looked away, focusing on the TV even though I wasn't seeing it. "It's complicated," I said. "Everything's complicated to you." That caught me off guard. "Excuse me?" "You always say that," he said, not aggressively, just pointing it out.
It's like your default answer when you don't want to say what you actually think. I stared at him, a mix of surprise and something else I didn't want to name. You're very observant, I said slowly. I told you, I notice things. Yeah, I muttered. I'm starting to see that. There was a pause, but it wasn't uncomfortable for him. If anything, he seemed more settled than I did. I think you're unhappy, he said. The bluntness of it made my chest tighten. You don't get to diagnose my life, I shot back. I'm not diagnosing anything, he said calmly. I'm just saying what it looks like. And what gives you the right to do that? He shrugged slightly. Nothing, I'm just being honest. That doesn't mean it's appropriate. Why not? He asked. Because I'm Ember? Yes, I said, sharper than I intended. That's exactly why. He leaned back, studying me in a way that made me feel exposed again. I don't think that automatically makes me wrong, he said. I didn't respond to that. Because again, part of me knew he wasn't entirely wrong, and that was getting harder to ignore. The conversation drifted after that, but the tension didn't fully go away. It lingered under everything, like a low hum. At some point, I realized how late it was. You should go, I said, more firmly this time, seriously. He nodded, but didn't move right away. You're kicking me out earlier than usual, he said. It's not earlier, it's a normal time. He gave me a look that said he didn't quite believe that. Okay, he said finally, standing up.
He grabbed his soda can, setting it on the coffee table, then picked up his hoodie. When he got to the door, he stopped again. You know I'm not trying to make things weird, right? He said without turning around. I hesitated. I know. I just like talking to you. That shouldn't have landed the way it did, but it did. You shouldn't rely on me for that, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm not what? He cut in, turning to face me. I opened my mouth, but the words got stuck. I'm not your friend, I said finally. The second it came out, I knew it sounded wrong. Too harsh, too defensive. He blinked, clearly caught off guard. I didn't say you were, he said. I know, but what? I shook my head, frustrated. This whole thing is just, it's not what it's supposed to be. And what is it supposed to be? You coming over for help with school, not this. He was quiet for a second, then nodded slowly. Okay, he said. So you want me to stop coming over? That question hung in the air, heavier than it should have been. Because the answers should have been easy. Yes, that's what I should have said. But I didn't. I think we just need to set better boundaries, I said instead. Even as I said it, I knew how weak it sounded. He watched me for a second, then gave a small nod. Got it. But there was something in his tone, something that told me he didn't really believe anything was going to change. And the worst part? He was right. Good night, Mrs. Carter, he said. Good night, Liam. He left, and I stood there again, in that same quiet house, feeling like I'd just missed an exit I should have taken. Set better boundaries. It sounded responsible, adult, controlled. But it wasn't action. It was avoidance. And over the next few days, that became painfully clear. Because nothing changed. If anything, things got closer. He still came over, still stayed longer than he should have, still asked questions that went deeper than they should have. And I kept answering. That was the real problem. Not him showing up. Not him noticing things. Me responding. Me engaging. Me allowing it to become something it was never supposed to be. The moment everything truly shifted didn't happen in some dramatic explosion. It happened on a quiet Friday night. Eric was home for once, but not really. He'd come back late, barely said 2 words to me, then disappeared into the bedroom with his laptop, claiming he had just a few things to finish. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I just let him go. Around 8:30, there was a knock. My stomach dropped before I even looked. I knew it was him. I opened the door just enough to step outside, closing it behind me. What are you doing here? I asked quietly. He looked surprised. I always come over. My husband's home. So? That one word made something twist in my chest. So this isn't a good time, I said. He studied my face for a second, then nodded slowly. Okay, he said. I can go. He turned like he meant it, and something in me reacted before I could think it through. Wait. He stopped. I don't know why I said it. Maybe because of the silence behind me in that house. Maybe because of the way Eric hadn't even noticed I left the room. Maybe because Liam did. I opened the door slightly. Just for a little while, I said. He looked at me, and there was something in his expression I hadn't seen before. Not confusion, not hesitation, something more certain. And that's when I realized, too late, that whatever this had turned into, he understood it better than I did, and I was the one who had let it get there. I knew the second I said, just for a little while,
that I'd already crossed something I couldn't uncross. Not physically, not in the way people immediately jump to when they hear stories like this, but mentally, emotionally. That line, the one I kept pretending I was managing, was gone. And the worst part was, I was aware of it while it was happening, and I still didn't stop. Liam stepped inside quietly, like he understood this wasn't the same as every other time. The house felt different with Eric in the next room, tighter, like the walls were listening. "Keep your voice down," I said automatically, closing the door behind him. He nodded, glancing toward the hallway that led to the bedroom. "He's here?" "Yeah." "Does he know I come over?" I hesitated just long enough for that to answer the question. "Not really," I said. He didn't react the way I expected. No surprise, no awkwardness. Just a small nod, like he was filing that information away. We stayed in the living room, lights dim, TV on low again, but neither of us was paying attention. I could feel my own heartbeat, louder than anything else in the room. "This feels different," he said quietly. "It is different," I replied. "Because he's here?" "Because it shouldn't be happening like this," I said, more firmly. He looked at me, head tilted slightly. "Then why is it?" I didn't have a clean answer for that. There wasn't one. "Because I made a bad call," I said, "and I'm trying to not make it worse." He held my gaze for a second longer, then leaned back into the couch. "You always say stuff like that," he said. "Like what?" "Like everything's already decided, like you don't have a choice." I let out a quiet breath. "I do have a choice. That's exactly the point." "Then choose," he said simply. The way he said it, so direct, so certain, made something twist in my chest. "You think it's that easy?" I asked. "I think you make it harder than it is." I shook my head slightly, almost to myself. "You don't understand." "Then explain it." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for a second I saw both things at once. The kid he was, and the person he was becoming. And that overlap is where everything felt the most dangerous. "It's not just about me," I said. "There are consequences. Lines you don't cross because once you do, you can't pretend you didn't." "Like what we're doing right now?" he asked. The question landed clean and sharp. "Yes," I said. There was a long pause after that. No background noise, no distraction. Just the weight of that word sitting between us. "So stop," he said. "It should have been that simple." "Yeah," I said quietly. "I should." But I didn't move. Neither did he. Another beat of silence passed, heavier than the last. "You don't want to," he said. It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation. I swallowed, feeling the truth of it, press against everything I'd been trying to hold together. "It's not about wanting to," I said. "It's about what's right." "And those are always the same thing to you?" "No," I admitted. "They're not." He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. Closer to me now, but not touching. "Then what do you actually want?" he asked. That question, no one had asked me that in a long time. Not Eric, not anyone. And I realized, sitting there in that dim living room, that I didn't have a clear answer anymore. "I want things to feel normal again," I said. "They weren't normal before," he replied immediately. I let out a small, humorless laugh. "No, they weren't." "Then why go back to that?" "Because it's safe," I said. "Because it's what I chose." "And you're happy with it?" I didn't answer. Because that silence said more than anything I could have forced out. We sat there like that for a while, neither of us moving, both of us fully aware of how far this had drifted from where it started.
Then, from down the hall, I heard something. A door shifting. Floorboards creaking. My entire body tensed. Liam heard it too. I could see it in the way he straightened slightly, his attention snapping toward the hallway. "Is that?" he started. "Shh," I whispered. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Getting closer. And then Eric appeared in the doorway. For a second, no one said anything. He stood there, taking in the scene. Mo on one end of the couch, Liam on the other, the TV casting that soft, flickering light across the room. "Hey," Eric said, his voice calm, too calm. "What's going on?" My brain scrambled to catch up, to piece together something that made sense. "This is Liam," I said quickly, "from next door. I've been helping him with school stuff." Eric's eyes shifted to him, studying him in a way that made my stomach drop. "At night?" he asked. "It's just, sometimes that's when he needs help," I said. Liam didn't say anything, just sat there, watching, which somehow made everything worse. Eric looked back at me. "How long has this been happening?" "Not long," I said. "Just a few weeks." "That's not what I asked." I swallowed. "A few weeks." He let out a slow breath, nodding slightly like he was processing it. "And you didn't think to mention it?" "It didn't feel like a big deal," I said, even though we both knew that wasn't true anymore. Another pause. Then Eric looked at Liam again. "Hey man," he said, his tone shifting just slightly. "Why don't you head home for the night?" Liam hesitated, just for a second. Then he nodded. "Yeah, okay." He stood up, grabbing his hoodie, and walked toward the door.
As he passed me, he didn't look at me, not even for a second. That hit harder than anything else. The door opened, closed, and then it was just me and Eric. The silence stretched out, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, he spoke. "That kid just called you by your first name when he left." My heart dropped, because I hadn't even noticed, but now that he said it, I could hear it in my head, clear as day. "Good night, Rachel." Not Mrs. Carter, not anything appropriate, just Rachel. I didn't correct him, I said weakly. Eric let out a short, sharp laugh, but there was no humor in it. "No, you didn't." He stepped further into the room, shaking his head slightly. "What exactly is going on here?" "Nothing," I said, too quickly. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come together in a way that sounded believable. Because the truth was messy. It wasn't an affair. It wasn't innocent. It was something in between, something undefined and inappropriate in a way that didn't have a clean label. "I don't know," I admitted finally. That seemed to frustrate him more than anything. "You don't know?" he repeated. "You've been spending time alone, at night, with a teenage kid, and you don't know what it is?" When he said it like that, it sounded worse than I'd let myself believe. "I didn't plan this," I said. "It just happened." "That's not an excuse." "I know," I said quietly. He stared at me for a long moment, like he was trying to decide what to do with everything he was seeing. "With everything going on between us," he said slowly, "this is what you chose to fill the gap with?" The question hit deeper than the accusation, because it wasn't entirely wrong. "I didn't think of it like that," I said. "But that's what it is." I didn't argue, because again, I couldn't. The room felt smaller, heavier, like everything was closing in. "I'm going to ask you one time," he said, "and I need you to be honest with me." I nodded, barely able to breathe. "Has anything happened between you and him that shouldn't have?" "No," I said immediately. "No, nothing like that." That part was true, but it didn't mean everything was okay. Eric held my gaze, searching for something. Maybe doubt, maybe confirmation. After a long moment, he nodded slyly. "Okay," he said. "Then it stops." There wasn't any room for negotiation in his tone. "It already should have," he added. "I know," I said, and for the first time that night, I actually meant it without trying to soften it. Because standing there, hearing it out loud, seeing it through someone else's eyes, it stripped away all the justifications I'd been hiding behind. It wasn't harmless. It wasn't just helping. It was something I let go too far because it made me feel less alone. And that came with consequences, whether I wanted to admit it or not. Eric turned away, running a hand through his hair. "I don't even know what to do with this," he muttered. Neither did I. But I knew one thing for sure. The version of this I'd been telling myself, the harmless one, the controlled one, that was gone. And in its place was something a lot harder to ignore, something I was going to have to face, whether I was ready or not. Because it didn't end when Liam walked out that door. That was just the moment everything finally became real, and there was no going back to pretending I didn't see it anymore.